the same time as you're making yourself a coffee. We're multidimensional beings that are experiencing the world in multiple dimensions at the same time. It was really interesting for me to read such differing opinions on something that I said. I really appreciate this comment. This person was craving more diversity and spectrum of reaction in a more complex context of using the physical law. And the other comment was denying the applicability of physical law in human interaction, which I also thought was very interesting. And all of that kind of led me to this understanding that before we even have that conversation or can have that conversation, it's important for us to make sure that we are on the same playing field, if that makes sense. So I got my whiteboard, I got my markers, I got my notebook because I had to pull some 6th grade physics class knowledge, and all of those memories are Russian. Yeah, so I had to make sure that I can translate all of that for you and for me. So yeah, let's get to that. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Newton's third law and our favorite lyric in Hamilton. Okay, so let me give you an example. If there is a car, ooh, that is a crazy car, but let's pretend it is one. And it is accelerating towards a wall. Eventually, it will make an impact with that wall, and the wall will exert a force of an equal magnitude and in the opposite direction of the force that the car exerted onto itself. And this is an equal and opposite reaction. And this is where I think Newton's third law can get a little bit confusing for some, because it is a reaction. Did this wall exert this specific amount of force into this random direction before the car made an impact to it? No, right? Because it is a reaction. And in physics, we understand that as forces cannot be isolated by themselves. Any force is an interaction. They have to be paired. And that's why we're looking at a specific moment of interaction, and we're not just considering all of the forces that are happening in the environment. Or we also don't assume that every object exerts a force in every direction at all times, because assuming that would mean that nothing can move, and that's not how the world works. And that's why in physics, when we're looking at forces, we're only looking at the forces that are being exerted on the object and not the forces that the object is exerting in other things. And then we're looking at the other object and all the forces that are being exerted on that, and not the forces that it is exerting. Because they're different systems. We have to be able to isolate them that way without isolating the forces. Like in this example, the damage that is done to the car and the damage that is done to the wall might not be proportionate towards each other, depending on, the wall and the car, obviously. After the impact, the car might be completely destroyed and the wall may be like there is some crack, but it's fine, even though the reaction was in equal magnitude and in opposite direction, if that makes sense. It's like if you're falling off the building, the impact that you will get and the splat that you give the earth are completely disproportionate to itself, if that makes sense. They're completely different systems. We have to isolate them and be able to look at them that way. And in physics, we use mass in order to describe that behavior and that relationship between each other. When we're translating it into such a complex situation as human interaction, we have to remember that we are complex being with multidimensional forces that we exert outside of us and are being exerted onto us. I like to think of it as layers. I think people who work with koshas will understand what I'm talking about. Here I'm drawing them of completely different sizes and not interacting with each other just for the ease of demonstration, but I really do believe that it's much more complex than that. But if you want to understand it, think of it that way. When you wake up, you're experiencing the world in a physical way. Like you wake up, you brush your teeth, you start your coffee, you start getting ready for work. But then at the same time, You might be experiencing it in a mental way, like you're preparing for work, you're going through all of the events that are going to be happening today, all of the interactions that you might have. Maybe you had a dream that you're thinking about and analyzing. And at the same time, you're also experiencing the world in the emotional layer of maybe that dream was a nightmare and you're having to like emotionally process that. Or maybe you woke up to a text or a call from someone and like that was really emotionally taxing and you're having to process that, you know, at the same time as you're preparing and planning for the day, at the same time as you're making yourself a coffee. We're multidimensional beings that are experiencing the world in multiple dimensions at the same time. And then imagine you're bringing another multidimensional being into this equation. And that is where usually people have a harder time translating the physical concept into the complexity of the human interaction. I will use the example of an extreme interaction because I find that extreme interactions give an opportunity for extreme reactions. So imagine if a person is acting negatively towards another person. We might expect an immediate, equal, and opposite reaction from that other person. And while that is true and can take place, I personally think it's one of the most unhealthy ways to communicate with other people. Like if someone is negatively interacting with you, you might be triggered and react with your trauma, and then they might get defensive because you might have accused them of something and they then react even in a bigger way, and then you're just like standing there with mirrors bouncing off each other's reactions that keep growing from bouncing off. And I'm not personally interested in communication in that way, but you do you, boo, you know. Now if we do remember that we are multidimensional beings, so let's say this person is interacting negatively, and maybe this person does not want to immediately react in an equal and opposite manner towards the person. Maybe they don't like confrontations. Maybe they understand that this person is going through something. Maybe they're practicing energy hygiene and don't take this person's shit, you know. For whatever reason, this person is not exhibiting an immediate reaction towards the other person. But we have to remember that that action is still going through the multidimensional being of a person. So let's say a theme was touched, the same theme that this person had in that morning call that like they're now still emotionally processing. So let's say that that action actually bounced off their emotional layer because it triggered them. And here a person can, you know, interact externally, or they can enter something that I call internal contemplation. So these things then now start bouncing off different layers, and a person is kind of like challenging these beliefs and that thought between the different beings of itself. My timer went off. And that's where people will get into cyclical thoughts and will overthink and such. And so by the time the person is able to actually bring their reaction to the person, for this person, the reaction is completely disproportional to what they give in, even though we can see that it has been growing inside of this person. And that can look like a boundary a person is putting for the communication in the future, that they don't want to talk to this person anymore, or just even a conversation that like, hey, this happened to me, let's talk about it. I don't know. Tell me what you guys think, I guess.